Okay. So good morning, and thanks for coming here to learn something about the restoration of Wachsfigurenkabinett. My name is Julia Wallmüller. I work at Deutsche Kinemathek. Is it okay with the sound? I work at Deutsche Kinemathek as a film restorer in the film archive in Berlin. So we don't have so much time, so we just start off. As you might know, there has been a chemical restoration of Waxworks in the late 1990s. This was a project carried out here in Bologna at Ritrovato. There is even somebody here who had worked on the restoration. And back then, the restoration was based on nitrate prints from the British Film Institute National Archive and the Cinémathèque Française. The prints back then already had quite some problems. So they had physical damage and chemical decay they had to deal with, which of course were also printed in the prints that were produced in this restoration, in this photochemical restoration. So this fact that we had all these signs of age and wear and tear in the restoration prints, and the fact that this is a very important expressionist film from German film history, formed the wish to redo this restoration and to make it available also for digital cinema. So that's why Deutsche Kinemathek wanted to restore the film again, and this time digitally. After all, it's one of the masterpieces of German German cinema. So in 2015, we got funding for this from the German Federal Commission for Culture and the Media, and we were lucky to have the Cineteca di Bologna, Fondazione Cineteca di Bologna, as cooperation partner in this project. And also, we were very lucky to work again with L'immagine ritrovata as our technical partner in this project. So 2015, we gathered together lots of material from several archives. There had been some research done already for the previous restoration, so some knowledge was already there about materials. The original negative of the film is lost. It got lost in a fire at the Paris Custom Office already in 1925, 1 year after the premiere of the film. So we were mainly interested in, of course, vintage prints from the 1920s. And we had all those vintage prints, all those nitrate prints shipped to Bologna. So mainly this was material from the British Film Institute, from the BFI, from Cinémathèque Française, and from Narodny Film Archive. There also was a print which was not from the 20s, but from we assume from the 40s, more or less, and it was of rather poor quality, so in the end we did not really use it. But we had all this material brought to Bologna, and the people there started to check the materials, and I also was involved in checking the materials here partly, but of course I could not stay here for a long time, so a major comparison work was done here by Bologna. And from all this material that we got, we decided on using these materials that I showed to you now, these elements. So mainly we used, the most interesting print for us was a nitrate print from the BFI, an English version of the film, of course, with English intertitles. It was a first generation print, which was produced directly from the original negative, and it was tinted and toned in 10 different color combinations of sometimes only tinting and sometimes combinations of tinting and toning. And it could be dated back, actually, the pictures could be dated back to, it was a stock from 1923, so we can say it can be dated back to the year of the premiere, more or less. And the titles were from 26, which was the year when the film was released in the UK. The second material was the nitrate print from Cinémathèque Française. Of course, the French version of the film. It was a third generation print, so a bit later than the one from the BFI. And it was tinted and black and white, and there was only one color of tinting in this film, and it was actually a bit strange because it started with kind of a system for the use of the printing. It was an orange tinting. It was an orange tinting. So in the beginning, I thought, okay, there is a kind of system where they use the tinting and where they use black and white. But from a certain point on, it was clear that there was really no system at all. So it was just more or less seemed casual, or from a certain point on, there was no tinting at all. It was just black and white. So it was a bit strange. And this print has been produced for the Canadian market. It had a title saying Les Tres Hommes de Cire, which was the release title in Canada, whereas in France it was called Le Cabinet des Figures de Cire. So it was a print produced for Canada, and we could not date it because it had an aqua stock which could not be dated in this case, but the negative that was the source for this print could be dated to 27, so it was really a bit later than the BFI print. Then we were lucky to get another interesting material from the BFI, an interesting film element, which was a black and white safety tube negative that the BFI had produced in the late 1970s from this nitrate print, from the first generation nitrate print that you see above. And this, of course, was very interesting for us because the chemical decay and the problems of the nitrate print had become more severe over the years. So this was a state of the print from the late 1970s, which was very precious to us. So I'm showing you some examples of the comparison between the two nitrate elements, the BFI nitrate print and the Kinemathek Française print on the right. You also see a bit of a color impression. This is, of course, the raw scan. It's not color corrected. In the BFI on the left side, on your left side, the bluish one, as you can see, shows much better photographic quality. You can see, I hope you can see this. There's a lot more detail, and we have better quality in terms of contrast and grayscale, and also the image is more complete in terms of framing. If you check the framing and if you check the borders on the right side, you can see it very well. You can see that the Kinemathek Française print on the right side is really cut off, so especially on the edges on the left, on the right. So we have a much better quality and more of the picture in the BFI print, but as I said, it had really a lot of problems: physical damage, heavy shrinkage up to 2.4%, and going along with the shrinkage, a lot of warped images, a lot of warped material. So this was really a problem, and chemical decay, especially for the tone sections. I will show you some pictures afterwards. The print from Kinemathek Française did not have any additional scenes. All the material was present in the BFI elements, but it had less single missing frames. So it had less single missing frames within shots, within scenes, so less jump cuts, and because of that, the better continuity. So photographically, but still photographically, was of really quite poor quality. It actually turned out that the Kinemathek Française print was produced from the BFI print. So the BFI print was a source for the print from Kinemathek Française. You can see it a bit in this image. On the right side, you have in the BFI print a big emulsion scratch on the right border. Sorry. And on the right border of the Kinemathek Française print, you can see a little white dot, which actually corresponds to the big white dot of the emulsion scratch in the BFI print. So by comparing the two materials, we realized that the BFI print had been the source for the French version. And this big emulsion scratch might also have been, or for sure was the reason why the edges of the Kinemathek Française print were cut off when it was printed. So, well, we had the pros and cons for each of the materials, and we had to decide if we either go for one of the two prints or if we try to make a combination and try to combine the most complete version of the film with the best quality, best possible quality. So that was what we in the end decided. And so we decided to make a combination of the two materials, or better say the three materials, because we were also using the dupe negative. So the Bfi print was the first choice whenever it was possible to use the material. Whenever there was too much damage or decay, we first took the material from the dupe negative of the Bfi, and whenever there were frames missing or in both Bfi elements we were not able to use one of them, we went for the Bfi for the Kinemathek Française print. So we started something similar that you might have heard in the presentation of Elena yesterday from La Roux. We started to make inserts for all the missing frames in the Bfi elements. We took those frames from Kinemathek Française, and it was about 225 inserts that we did, with a length between one frame and sometimes also more than 500 frames. So it was different gaps that we had to fill using the Bfi print. Here I just briefly, I'm sorry for the translation, I think I was talking very fast in the end. I'll try to do better. So here just some pictures from the Bfi Nitrate Print I took. You also get a bit of an impression from the colors. You can see on these photos there were lots of splices. On the first one you see an example for a splice with missing frames. We had scratches. Maybe you can see this emulsion scratch on the second image I talked about. This was also a varnished surface of the Bfi print, where a lot of scratches had been covered by this varnish, so it was a bit difficult sometimes to get rid of the scratches in the wet gate. Then, of course, we had a lot of physical damage of the perforation. You can see a repaired image already on the third frame, on the third photo, and also, of course, lots of marks or other damages in the image, so lots of loss of emulsion, loss of image information. Then the print, as I said, was heavily shrunk and very warped. And this, of course, is a very big problem. If you digitize a print like this, you have lots of warping in the image, which made it impossible for us in many scenes to use the Bfi print directly, because the images were just too heavily warped. So in many of those cases, we had to take the dupe negative instead, which lucky enough was a really good dupe negative. It was a really good duplication of this nitrate print. But you can also, on the third picture, I just put this here to give you an impression how good the colors were preserved, at least for the tinting. Also, these are some examples for colors. The first two pictures and the pictures on the right are examples for a combination of tinting and toning in the print, and you can see that the image is covered with stains, really. And these stains are not part of the image itself, but they are really stains from the decomposition of the toning. So this was a big problem for the toned scenes, that we could not use some of them because of these heavy degradation of or decay of the toning. So just to give you brief statistics, this is what we actually could use. 26% more or less from the nitrate print was all we could use. The main part came from the Bfi dupe negative, which I think was not at disposal in the restoration, in the photochemical restoration in 98, but I don't know why actually. And we only used 2% of the Kinemathek Française print, so it was just total 12 shots that we used totally from this print, and the rest was really served for making all the inserts to replace the missing frames. So now, please, Antonino, can you show the clips? I have two clips showing you a comparison between the Bfi Nitrate print and the Kinemathek Française print. Whenever there is no images, it is black. So you see the Bfi on this side and the Kinemathek Française on the right side, and there is a black image if we don't have any frames. So you can see dots and well, scratches, just see for yourself. I have problems watching now, but I know the clips. We can see that there are some frames missing. We have jump cuts. And please also pay attention to the emulsion scratch on the right side of the Bfi print, which was also a reason for us to cover the borders a bit more in the reconstruction. Not only this, now we're getting close to the end of reel 2, and that's why in the Bfi print we got more and more damage and more missing frames. As you can see, this is the real change, let's say. Now we're in reel 3. So this was a scene which where we had to reconstruct really a lot from the Kinemathek Française print. And now we are seeing a clip with the reconstructed version, so the raw scan of the reconstructed version, a combination of Bfi print and Kinemathek Française print on the left side, and on the right side the restored version. And you can see that, and I have to apologize because the image is cut off even more in this file. This is just a working file, so you see a bit more actually in the restored version. This is just a working clip. And but still, you can see that we had to cover the edges of the image quite a lot. Not only because of this scratch that we did not want to see because it's almost there it's there for almost the whole film, but also because of the different framing of the two elements. We had to go for the framing where we saw less, the framing of the Kinemathek Française print. So this is a bit of a pity, actually. But you can see in the result that we managed quite well to match those two sources. And in this scene, I think we have several inserts, short ones and a longer one. And you should also be able to see the difference in the image material still in the restoration, because the materials were of such different photographic quality that it was really a hard work to match those two elements, the Bfi and the Kinemathek Française element, which was a great challenge, because you have this difference in photographic quality and you have the difference in geometry due to the warping and the shrinking. And so they made a lot of effort here at L'immagine Ritrovata in the technical department and in the color grading to match those two sources. But you can still see the difference. So sometimes it really turns, you got this loss of sharpness and loss of detail, and you can still notice it. But that was the consequence of our decision to make the film as complete as possible and to make all those inserts. So thank you to all the people who worked on this and made it look still quite good, very good in the end. So I actually wanted to focus in this presentation on the question what the original version of Paulini's film might have looked like, because this was something when we presented the film at the Berlinale this year in Berlin at the film festival. This was actually the thing that was of most interest to the people, at least that was my experience always when I talked about it. And so this brings us to this key question: what did the original version look like, the premiere version, let's say. I want to give you a brief production history insight, because I think it is helpful to understand the film, the history of the film and the film itself. So here there's a little timeline of the production history. Paulini, who actually started his film career as a set and costume designer. He was working for Ernst Lubitsch, for Joe May, for Ea Dupont. And with the time he started to direct himself. He also designed all the settings for Waxworks, by the way. Waxworks was a long planned project by him. He first started to be interested in this project already, maybe also before 1920, but there was already a script in 1920 by Henrik Galeen for this film, a first version of the script. And Leni acquired the rights for the story. And in 1922, he founded his own production company, Leni Production. And the Waxworks was already announced as the first big picture, the first big production of this company. And it was announced as a film with 4 episodes and the background story. And not only 4 episodes, but also 4 characters, which already had a name by the time. There were several press announcements already 2 years before the film actually was presented, and there were lots of graphics and posters and even photographies that were produced. This was from 1920. There was the one before. So here you have one example of a poster, a film poster that was done already. I think this is from 1922 still. So all the characters had already been fixed 2 years at the latest before the premiere. Leni tried to start shooting for a long time, but he had problems. The shooting was postponed several times. There was this, I talked about also in the introduction, there was the ongoing inflation, money continued to lose its value, and he just could not come up with a financiation for the film. It became more and more difficult. In 1923, the production was taken over by Neptun Film AG, and then they finally started shooting in spring 1923. And during shooting, they already made lots of contracts with foreign, or also German, but foreign distribution companies. And in all the contracts, there are also 4 characters described or named. So they started shooting in this order that I put up here on the screen. They first shot the Harun al-Rashid episode, then they shot the Ivan the Terrible episode, and then the Jack the Ripper episode. And the film was shot in Berlin, in the May Film Studios in Berlin-Weißensee. So you might have noticed that there was this 4th figure still on the advertising picture of the UFA. The 4th figure was, the 4th character foreseen for this film was Rinaldo Rinaldini, an Italian thief that was supposed to be the character of episode number 3. It is the story of a noble thief that saves the princess Violante from a bunch of dishonorable banditi who conquested her. No, not conquested. Who what's the word? They took her and wanted to get money for that. They kidnapped her. Thank you. They kidnapped her, and Rinaldo Rinaldini saves her, and of course they fall in love. So Ditele, who was doing the part of the poet in the film and of the male hero in all the episodes, he of course was to be supposed Rinaldo, and Princess Violante should be played by Olga Belayev, who was doing the female parts of all the episodes in the film. For filming this episode, Leni imagined a wide landscape with mountains, with hills and caves, typical for thieves, Italian thieves. So he was. This was supposed to be shot either in a bigger studio, which they could not afford, or in Italy, which they also could not afford. So obviously, for several months, he tried to somehow realize this episode because the film had been, or the other episodes had been shot, and he just didn't get on with releasing the film. So obviously he was still trying to complete this work he had wanted to do for so many years. But in the end, somehow, he had to realize that it was just not possible. Still, in all the promotional material you find from the time, you still have the figure of Rinaldo Rinaldini present. And he's also, as I said, mentioned in all the contracts. So September 23 was the end of the shooting. In February, the film 24, the film was first presented for censorship in Berlin. So 4 months after shooting was done, then another 8 months passed and nothing happened. Maybe this was also still the attempt to realize the last story, we don't know. So 8 months passed until the film was presented in Vienna, which I don't have any record of this. And then 1 month later, it was presented again for censorship with a slightly different length, but only slightly, a different real division. And then it was premiered in Berlin in the Ufer Theater at Kurfürstendamm. So the film reaches the cinema with a great delay. And so I always wondered what could be the reason for this delay. I think one of the reasons, as I said, was attempting to still shoot this Rinaldini episode. But also there's an interesting fact about the premiere of the film, which is that Paolini changed the order of episode for the premiere. And it was not only the premiere in Berlin, but also the premiere in the UK 2 years later. So instead of showing the episodes in this order, first Harun al-Rashid, then Ivan the Terrible, and then Jack the Ripper, he changed it to this order. He showed first Ivan, then Jack, and then Harun. Considering, if you saw the film, and if you know the film, considering that there is a film with 3 episodes and the background story, which forms the framework and also introduces the episodes and leads from one episode to the other, to the next one, this is complete nonsense. It does really make the background story fall apart completely. So this is a very strange thing. So it makes me think that maybe Paolini was very insecure about his film in the end, because he had imagined something else. He had imagined a film with 4 stories, and he could not complete this. So obviously he was struggling with his work of art. Studying the German reviews from the time after the premiere in Berlin, Harun was described as the most entertaining story and the most funny story. You have seen Emil Jannings doing this very funny part of the Caliph. So maybe he got a similar feedback from the show in Vienna, and maybe this made him change the order of episodes to have the most amusing part at the end. I don't know this, but this was something I would assume or could imagine. Also the very different length of the 3 episodes. We have 40 minutes almost of Harun al-Rashid, 30 minutes of Ivan, and just about 6 or 7 minutes of Jack the Ripper. Could be an indication about this great delay the film, or this insecurity Paolini had, and about delaying his film for so much time. But of course, we have to remember these difficult financial circumstances, so that might also be the explanation for everything. This is just pure assumptions. When we started working on the film, we of course wanted to restore the original German version, including, and above all, the original intertitles, which had not been seen for decades. During the last almost 100 years now, and we always saw the film only with German or English or French intertitles. So the result of the previous restoration, the print had French intertitles. For instance, they choose to reconstruct the French version. So we wanted to to reconstruct the German intertitles. So we, of course, were searching for sources for these German texts, which we did not have at the first moment. We were, of course, looking for prints, but as I said, there was no original negative, and there were no German prints that we had from this film. We were also looking for censorship cards, which are in Germany a very, very important source for original texts in the silent area, but also later on. And we found the 2 catalog entries for this film, but the cards itself were not there. So we just know that it was presented 2 times, and we can see with which length. And we learned that the film had a certain length, which, if you compare it to the restored version today, is about 25 minutes longer than what we have today of the film, which is already interesting, but it still doesn't help us in our search for the original German version. Of course, then we checked our archive for film accompanying materials. Also, we asked in other archives, and we found beautiful colored photographs and various photographs of the setting, but of shooting. but we did not. Or we found also text lists. Sorry, yeah, which I come back in just a minute to the text lists. There is also a film script. Of course, we have various versions of the script, also typed versions, and I think there's also a script in the archived in the BFI, and the script has also been published in the 90s. A very nice book which I can recommend. So the script was a source we should study. Sorry, here, yeah, this is the book, the film script by Henrik Gallin. So the different copies of the script that we have, they differ a bit from each other, but not essentially. And this book was published by, if I understand it right, Deutsche Kinemathek and Cinegraph in the 90s. So I can really recommend that if you read German. So studying, I started to study to compare the script with what we have now from the film, what has survived, which might even be just an export version. And it could even be that it doesn't correspond at all to the German version that has been released. And of course, there were a lot of differences. Above all, of course, the fourth episode, the Rinaldo episode, which is described in a lot of detail in the script. But there were also lots of differences in the background story, especially at the beginning of the film, when the writer arrives at the panopticum, but also in the passages between the episodes. There were differences in the script. It is also there were also differences within the episodes, the way the story enrolls, and sometimes there were more detailed descriptions of scenes. Sometimes there are scenes in the film who are not described in the script at all. So it became quite obvious that during shooting or montage, they often took different decisions than foreseen in the script. And that the script was not a really reliable source for us for finding the original German text for the intertitles. They were some texts I could identify in the script that corresponded to the English titles we had. They could be found in the script, but not marked as intertitles. So some were just in the running text, and well, the script turned out not to be a reliable source anyway. The Jack the Ripper episode, which is of great interest because it is so short in the film, is described in much more detail in the script. So it is really a story that is much longer than it ended up in the film. Although if you study it, you can see the traces of this story. But it is a much longer story in the script, and it even has an alternative end. There are two different endings for this episode in the script. And one big difference, for example, I don't know if you noticed, but in the English version, the character is called Spring-Heeled Jack, which was a different criminal. It's not Jack the Ripper. We don't know why, because as you can see, for example, on this still, still from the shooting of the film, that this was always called Jack the Ripper. Also in the script it's called Jack the Ripper, but for some reason for the English version they changed it to Spring-Heeled Jack. And also in the reviews, in the English reviews from the time, sometimes they call him Jack the Ripper, sometimes Spring-Heeled Jack, and sometimes they just write a modern criminal. So there's the mystery about this one. I think still that what we have today of the Jack the Ripper episode is what has been shot, because it doesn't seem to me that there are parts missing. There are a lot of fadings from one scene to another, and I think they are all connected to each other the way they are. I think they just did not manage to shoot more of this episode at the time. So I want to go back to the issue of the text lists, because we had some text lists in our archive, even German text lists, and in the first moment we were excited about them, but we had to realize that these German text lists were just retranslation from the English texts that are preserved in this English version in the BFI. So no source for us, but we got a very interesting text list from the Swedish Film Archive. A text list that has a stamp, as you can see, from May 1924, which was half a year before the film was released. So at that time, Sweden was already preparing for a release. And comparing this Swedish list with the other language version, I notice a lot of differences. All the other versions, French and English and the German retranslations, they all correspond to each other. So they're all based on the English texts. But this list showed a lot of difference. It had different wording, it had a different structure sometimes. The way the characters were introduced, for example, for the single episodes. And also the story involves in a different way sometimes. So it seemed to me that it really gives indication about scenes that had been there in the film at the time of the premiere, and that are not preserved anymore. So it might be a good indication for the German original version. So I give you two short examples for this. This is the beginning of the scene, and what you see is a kind of reduced comparison list that I made with all the intertitle versions. So this is a bit reduced. It was more detailed. And you don't have to read it, but you see in the column E, there are the Swedish titles. And to the left of this, there is nothing, which are the columns for the English titles and the German titles and the French titles. So we have more titles in the Swedish list than in the other versions. So this is the beginning of the film. The poet arrives at the fair, at the Luna Park, and he looks around. He looks at the job advertising. And then he, in this scene in the film, you might not remember, but in the very last moment of this shot, he starts smiling. And what actually happens in the script and also in the Swedish title list is that he sees the daughter of the panopticon owner, which is called Eva. So he sees her, and he gets distracted because she's so beautiful, and he gets hit by a swing, and he falls on the floor. He's hurt. She runs there and she says, "Oh, are you hurt?" And that's something that is there in line. It's like title 7 in the Swedish line. It says, "Are you hurt? Does it hurt?" And then he says, "I'm looking for tent number 7." And the girl says, "Oh, but that's our place. So you're looking for us." And she's even introduced. She has an introducing title. So the Olga Belayev is introduced as an actor, and then you see the panopticon, which is again in the film, and you see her taking him inside the panopticon, and then there is the panopticon owner, who is also in the Swedish version introduced. The actor is introduced, John Gotthold, in the film, in the original or in the Swedish version, at least. So there is for sure some minutes missing in the beginning of the film. I found several scenes where something similar popped out from the Swedish title list. So this was very interesting. And there were even another example for a mistake, kind of a translation mistake, was in this scene where Harun enters the home of Sarah, of the female character in the Harun episode. So if you remember it, he goes upstairs. She's there thinking her husband is coming back, and he gets inside. He attempts. I skipped the part where he goes back down the stairs. He attempts to get close to her, and then this is cut very rough in the preserved version because there are a lot of frames missing actually, and the title in the English version is "Pet," like darling or something like this, and it is also translated like this into the other languages. But actually, if you check line, I think 97 in the Swedish version, it says "Psst," and that's what he does. He's making this, so he actually says, "Oh, be quiet." And she's shocked, and to make this more clear, he does again this. So this is a different decision or a mistake, because pet is quite close to pst if you look at the spelling. So this was not the only, let's say, mistake. Maybe it was also on purpose, but it's actually a mistake that I found comparing the Swedish title list with the version preserved. So just to sum it up, this title list gave some indications really about what the original version could have been like. It especially showed that the background story was much more elaborated. There was more detail in the beginning. There was also more detail in the parts that connected the episodes. For example, the connection between the Ivan part and the Harun, or the Harun and the Ivan part. There was a dialogue in the Swedish title list that is not preserved in the English version. We also learned that Sarah is actually not called Sarah, but Maimune, which is also the name in the script and also the name preserved in the Swedish title list. We learned that, as I said, there were some mistakes, some different interpretations of content in the English version. Also, the ending of the Sa Ivan episode was much more detailed. There's a twist that you cannot even imagine anymore in the version preserved in the BFI and all the other versions, but you can still read it parallels in the Swedish title list and the film script. So the only thing that is kind of proved by studying the Swedish title list is that I think that the Jack the Ripper episode was not longer, because there are no intertitles at all for this episode, not even an introduction of the character. So I think this was always a very small part. So I made an attempt to use the Swedish title list and the script to reconstruct the text of the German titles, but and for a while it was working out, but then at a certain point it got too speculative. So we decided that we just would have to make up too much of the text, and that was not our wish. So that's why we reconstructed, or we restored the English version, which was kind of consequent, because the BFI version was the source, the main source for us, also the source for the colors, and also the source for the text in the end. So just a short thanks to Fondazione Cineteca di Bologna, Gianluca Farinelli, for being our partner, of course, in this project, also for having us here at the festival, which we're very glad that the festival happens at all and that we can be here. Big thanks to Immagine Ritrovata, Elena, Davide, Alberto, Giando, Mariana, Magna, all the very, very many helping hands that worked for almost 4 or 5 years on this project. So I think I'm very short. Just this last slide, I wanted to draw your attention to the Blu-rays and DVD edition that we made for this film, or Absolute Medien for Germany made for this film, and I hope in the beginning of November you will be able to find the Flickrelli edition of the restoration of this film. So please watch out for this if you're interested, and then we'd be very happy to welcome you tonight also in Piazza Maggiore for the restoration of Sylvester, if it doesn't rain. Okay, thank you for your attention, and if we still have some time for questions, I'd be happy to answer your questions. 10 minutes, oh wow, okay, I heard so much. Okay, so if you have questions now or later. Just a moment.
It's only a wish. If you could go back and show us the poster, the colored one, because it was very fast.
At the beginning?
It was in the middle. I remember it was colored.
Okay.
And it was when you spoke about the text. This one.
Yes, it's a photography.
It's a photography.
It's a photography from our archive, hand-colored photography, which I guess it's from 1922 or 23. It was the time when they produced all this advertising material for the release of the film, which was then postponed so much time. I was actually also very, very happy that I had found this poster I showed in the beginning, which I only had seen as a replica before. This one, beautiful. It is archived in Berlin, also in a graphic archive at the Art Bible library of Berlin. Beautiful poster. So it was a very challenging work, technically also very challenging. And what I said about maybe if we still have some time for especially the part of the inserts, of course, was a difficult decision, because what we bought in making the film more complete and regaining the continuity of the film was really that we had to live with this very, very different image quality of the two sources we used, or of the three sources. But mainly the Kinemathek Française print was really of less quality, and not only the photographic quality, but also what I said, that we had to cut the borders really to be able to insert the frames from Kinemathek Française, because if we would not have covered the borders, we would have had this change in zoom, which had been done in the printing when they produced this French print at the time. So this, of course, was a difficult decision, but it was a decision that we took in order to regain the continuity, which seemed more important to us than, or it seemed more, it was a bigger wish not to have as many jump cuts as there were in the British version. And also we decided not to do fadings between the two sources, which is a possibility that we had, to do a fading between one source to the other. But in this case, we decided not to do it, because anyway, you would see the change in the image. So I thought we should do without fading, because we would create more artificial frames by fadings, and the jump from one quality to the other one is there, visible anyway. Martin.
Can you go to that scheme with the edge codes?
Yeah.
Right.
Here.
As we can see from this whole research that you did, you never do what I want you to do, work fast, but you go deeper, which in the end is better. No, the one where you have written out which print has which edge code. There was a table.
Oh.
And I did not realize how poor this production was, because it is evident from those stock dates. If the Agfa print that was exported to England was printed in 1923, which...
The stock is from 1923, so it might have been printed in 24, I guess.
Yeah, but still, if you export a film in 1926 to England, and you are so poor that you have to send them a print from the first run, which was perhaps 5 prints,
lucky
or something
for us,
like that. That tells you something about how poor they were, and with how small this production was. In hindsight, we now think this was an important film, because it has been written about by Lotte Eisner, a whole chapter in her Écran démoniaque. And then, of course, this goes further. Once you are in Lotte Eisner, you have a film that is being discussed for the next 50 years, and we are still at it. Yeah? But at the time, obviously, this was a production which was so poor that they couldn't even finish the film.
The production, yes, but the echo was very good in the press. And it had a great success in London and in New York. He showed it in 26 in New York also, and he had a very good reviews.
And it made him go to Hollywood.
It made him go emigrate to the US in the same year, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, 26.
But still, it's amazing how much mileage you can get out of such a small production. That's what I wanted to point out.
And the edge codes for us were extremely interesting, not only for dating the prints, but also if you look at the second picture, you can see that the aqua edge code is not black. It is sepia, of sepia color. And in this scene that we see now, the sepia toning is quite evident. So all the blacks are turned into sepia by the toning process, which was one of those important, most common coloring processes at the time. So in this scene, it was quite obvious that there was a toning, but there were many other scenes where you could not see any of the toning in the image. We had sepia toning and blue toning, and studying the edge codes revealed to us a lot of scenes that had toning, but you could not see it anymore in the image. You could just see it by reading the edge codes besides. So we really had to go through the whole film, studying every single shot and studying the edge codes to come up with a color plan for the grading. And also in the digital grading, I was present. There was Gian Domenico doing the grading with all the digital equipment, and I was in the back with a hand winder with the nitrate print, checking with the loupe every single shot for for last indications. I had done that before, and I had the plan, but still, we checked very carefully what was the exact tone of blue, of cyan we wanted to apply, what was the intensity we wanted to take from the nitrate print. So this was a very, very detailed and very, very exciting work, and really like searching for treasures, information from the print. Okay, if you don't have any further questions, then thank you for coming, and have still a wonderful last 2 days.